All right, hello, Facebook. This is Tommy Valentine, the Executive Director of Historic Athens. We appreciate you tuning in today. We're excited to welcome you to what is episode 47 of our 55 episode series, This Moment in History, COVID-19 in Athens, Georgia. Today's guest is City Manager Blaine Williams, and we're really looking forward to speaking with him. If this is your first episode, we want to help you get settled in. So we're just going to tell you a few things here. First of all, if you're interested in watching any of the previous 46 episodes, you can do so on the videos section of our Facebook page. So just head to facebook.com/historic Athens, head to the video section. You can see some of our past discussions with community leaders, entrepreneurs, restaurant owners, and the like. The other thing we want you to know is that this episode is not just intended for you to sit and watch. This is also something you can participate in. So if you have any questions, especially if they're about COVID-19, feel free to drop them in the comment section below this video. They'll appear to Blaine and I, and we can go ahead and throw them up on the screen. So we would love to have you be a part of this historic record. Our intention at the completion of this series is to take all 55 episodes and contribute them to our local libraries and research institutions. So by asking questions, you can help guide that historic record, and you can also be a part of it. Each week of this program, and there were 11 weeks total, has been brought to you by a different local organization or sponsor. This week's sponsor is the Athens Downtown Development Authority, working to improve and direct our downtown here in Athens, Georgia. And we really appreciate David and Linda and everyone over at the Athens Downtown Development Authority for supporting this effort to explore and document this unique, often difficult, but very historic moment in Athens, Georgia history. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and bring our guest on the line. So bear with me 1 second while I make that switch. All right, and Blaine, welcome to the program. How are you today?
I'm good, Tommy. Thank you. I hope you're well.
Yes, I am. I will admit that if I had known you were going to be so sharp today in your suit and tie, I would have dressed up a bit more for the occasion. But I know that you're at work, and I know that the work of the city doesn't stop even when COVID interferes. So, Blaine, you may be a familiar name to many of the people tuning into this. You may also be someone that some of the folks in town have worked with or collaborated with. But I imagine to a lot of our viewers, they don't know you yet, or at least they don't know much about you. So could you take a few moments and just introduce yourself and talk about your relationship to the city of Athens?
Absolutely, Tommy, and thank you. I appreciate you having me on your show.
Of course.
So my name's Blaine Williams, and I'm the fourth manager of the Unified Government of Athens, Clarke County. That was unified back in 1991 by the voters of Athens, Clarke County, voters of the city of Athens, and the voters of Clarke County. I grew up in North Augusta, South Carolina, which is about 2 hours east of here. North Augusta is just across the river from Augusta, Georgia, in South Carolina. And I went to Presbyterian College in South Carolina, which is a small regional liberal arts college. And I came here to the University of Georgia in 1991 to get my master's in public administration from the School of Public and International Affairs here at the University of Georgia. I've lived and worked in Georgia since then, so I've tried to honor the help that the university gave me by accepting me into the program. And I have worked for a city government. I have worked for a county government. I have worked for a regional government. I have worked in the private sector, and I now work for a unified government. So I think I've done the career hat trick, if you will. Most recently, I was the assistant manager under Alan Reddish, and he retired about 4 years ago. Before that, I was the manager in Floyd County, Georgia, which is where Rome, Georgia is. It's about 60 miles. It's just really the other side of Atlanta from where we sit. I was the assistant there for several years before that. I do want to mention the private sector because I think that was a very helpful time for me, certainly stepping outside of government. I worked for a small firm that offered nonprofit hospitals project management experience or representation in hiring architects, contractors if they needed to do any expansions. And interestingly about that, the Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center was my client for most of the last part of my time with that firm. And that was during Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, wow.
And so we, big charity as it's known in New Orleans, in University Hospital, uh, looking to replace the damage they sustained. There was a time when I was living in a camper on Canal Street when the city was still under martial law, and just a fascinating time. And I'm not sure a lot of Americans really understood that this was a major American city that had this tremendous damage. Um, and then also, I guess, of interest, Tommy, that my wife and I, early on in our careers, saved up some funds, fixed up an old sailboat, and lived on it for about a year and a half.
Wow.
So that ought to be the interesting human aspect there.
Yeah, I feel like we could just block out the hour and talk about that experience. Blaine, so I'm really fascinated by two of the things I heard there. So personally, I'm also a graduate of the UGA MPA program. And as you've alluded to, there's a lot to draw on from that experience. But the years I spent in the private sector continue to help me now that I'm in the public sector. What was it, I guess as a two-pronged question, what do you find most useful that you learned in the private sector? And what, while working in the private sector, helped direct you back to the public sector?
Those are great questions, Tommy. So I was hired by a gentleman who, I was previously a downtown and river development director, and the chair of the DDA board owned this company that eventually hired me. And I told him, I said, Walt, I don't know anything about your business. And he said, well, you know what you know that I can't teach you, and I can teach you the rest. And so one of the first things that strikes me is taking that leap of faith
Mm-hmm.
into a career field I really hadn't had a lot of prior experience, and showing up to work that day, and many of the people in the office looking at me like, why are you here? And understanding that if I did not bring value every single day to that firm, then I wasn't I didn't need to be a part of it. And so that has stuck with me. And then also the nature of the work was project management, and that may or may not mean something to people, but that is a system by which things get accomplished. And everything that we do in local government is a process because it involves human beings. And so there are expectations to be set. People expect something to happen at a certain point, and so sort of laying that process out. And so using that project management experience has been really helpful to me in any job that I've had in the
Mm-hmm.
wake of that one.
This is a topic I'm sure that you've had to study and discuss at length, but as you mentioned, it's one that maybe the audience isn't as familiar with. But you know, you mentioned that in the private sector, you had the sense that when you were at the firm, if you didn't deliver value every day, then you really shouldn't be there. One of the, I guess, the main difference between the private sector and the public sector, besides where the funding comes from, is that profit motive. Whereas in the public sector, it's a little more difficult to measure performance or determine how you're doing, or all of these things. And so, if how do you, as a public sector manager, think about performance, and how do you to work to measure the performance of the people you manage?
Another excellent question. And there's so many different ways that I could address that. And I guess the first thing, just for your average person, so
Mm,
there's been this saying over the years, government needs to be run like a business.
mm,
And so I do think that there is some truth to that as far as efficiency, data, measuring, realigning, that type of thing. But one thing I would posit to you and others is that, I worked in a very small firm. The CEO of that was something that the employees referred to him as something with a hurricane. I mean, he would come in and his vision was clear and he was making things happen.
right.
You really can't do that in the public sector. And I know that this is a university town. We have a lot. Our human intelligence capital is off the charts, and I would say our passion here is as well. And there are people that have studied things for their entire lives, and they come to us and they say, I've already thought of this solution.
Mm.
You should do it this way. And what we always say is, but you've got to have a lot of other people buy into this. And
Right.
so government is necessarily slower to react, is not as nimble. But in the end, there's a lot more people involved and perspectives heard. That's the way it's supposed to work, and that's the way that I've witnessed it work here.
Did you have Dr. Hal Rainey during your studies? Was he teaching
I
at the?
did.
Yeah.
In fact, I dress this way because of Dr. Rainey.
Yeah, Dr. Rainey, Dr. Rainey, amazing professor, a legendary professor. I know that one of the things he discusses when he talks about government is the difference between an ocean liner and a speedboat. That, you know, you can turn a speedboat almost 45 degrees instantly and it's fine, but if you try to turn an ocean liner 45 degrees, suddenly you'll rip the ship apart. And so it's a matter of incremental change. But even with a 5-degree change or a 1-degree change from an ocean liner, in the matter of an hour, you're in an entirely different place than where you would have otherwise been. Is that the kind of incremental change you're referring to? Is that the kind of nimbleness that you think one has to consider in local government?
Well, and if you think about it, Tommy, I agree with Dr. Rainey's that analogy. I think that's an apt one. Um, you know, American government was built for disagreement. And that's the way that it's structured, and I'm not sure folks really understand or appreciate that. And while this may be anathema to some, um, usually what happens is you have multiple points of view that disagree with one another, and out of that comes compromise.
Mm.
And so somewhere in the middle is something that is good for the collective whole. And so, because of that, and again, I want to go back to working for a very small firm. There wasn't a lot of disagreement. The founder was the owner. He had a very small group of investors he answered to. He had a clear vision of what he wanted. Of course, he was open to hearing our opinions, but in the end, he makes the decision. And here is the consensus of the elected representatives of the people that is the power of this local government. And they are the ones that have to, they come, as you all know, we have 10 different commissioners and a mayor. They're all very different human beings. They have different life experiences. Uh, Athens is an amazingly diverse, uh, for the size of the types of folks that live here. And as we hear those voices, it's going to take time to get through that and for them to disagree with one another and compromise. And that is a drama that you see play out each and every time they meet.
This is fascinating, Blaine. I want to dig into this for just a second. So, you know, when we think of American history, I can't remember quite which presidential administration it was, but, you know, there's an era called the era of good feelings. It was an era where apparently that one brief era in American history where no one was arguing. But it sounds to me like that's almost something that you don't see as the goal based on what you just said, that disagreement, that tension, uh, when it's present, it also suggests that people feel comfortable sharing and participating in the process, and that's how compromise happens. So that drama you're talking about, is that something that, I'm not sure I'd say you're happy to see, but is that something you expect to see in a functioning local government?
Well, I think that, change is ever present and even more so now,
Mm.
and it's uncomfortable. And also, I think we can agree, and there's a lot to be said about the polarization of views of late. Although I've seen, this is nothing new in our history.
Mhm.
The polarization, it kind of waxes and wanes. It's a pendulum, if you will.
Mhm.
And so, where people, I think it's unfortunate that people are uncomfortable sometimes saying what's on their mind or being judged by others, perhaps, for having
Mhm.
those views, when it is very much a part of the American political experience that we do disagree with one another and we do attempt to find common ground that maybe isn't exactly where you started, but it's somewhere different from where it's somewhere different than where you started.
Blaine, I would be remiss to skip over the description of city manager itself. You know, this is as long as I've lived in Athens and as long as I've been reading local journalism, there's always been various hot takes on what a city manager is. Recently, I saw a wave of understanding kind of wash out across social media as people are again grasping what the difference between what a mayor does in a system like ours versus what a city manager does. Could you break that down for our viewers?
Sure. And you know, there are many of us across the nation, but really in any one town, there's only one. And so it is a common form of government. I will say that the unified government here is a special form of government, and there's only 40 of them across the nation.
Mm.
And that's out of 90,000 types of local government or units of local government. So having said that, and I have seen in social media and in certain articles that somehow where I sit is the seat of power, and I contest that. I work for the mayor and commission. I very much respect the elected officials. They are the representatives of the people, and this is something for people that find hard to understand. And I've even argued with academics in my profession on this. But you know, certainly as a human being, I have things that I would like to see and happen and have priorities. Everybody does. But if I were to assert those or try to game the system
Mm-hmm.
for my liking with the elected officials, I mean, these are intelligent people. They would quickly see that, and I've seen my peers do that in other cities and counties, and they don't last very long. And the point of this is not for me to hold my job, but to respect the role that I play. And so the main role that I play is helping to manage the day-to-day operations of the local government. So in and of itself, without all the policy and political things that are happening, we have 1,700 employees. We're one of the largest employers in Athens, Clarke County. We have about 35 different service lines, if you will, if we're making an analogy with private sector.
Mm-hmm.
Not all those are overseen by the manager's office. We have constitutional officers. Those are elected officials of their own right, like the sheriff, tax commissioner, the judges, um, the coroner. There's many others, folks that don't answer to my office or me,
Mm-hmm.
or the mayor and commission for that matter, but we still have to provide them funds. And so they're the daily services that are really foundational to our citizens. You know, the water that comes through your tap when you turn it on. You know, our public safety, our fire, our building inspections. I mean, everything that we do is really foundational to everyday life. And you know, and the value that we provide too, Tommy. I say this to our new employees sometimes. You know, how much do you think it costs to deliver 1,000 gallons of clean water to your house on demand? So I'm
Oh,
asking you, Tommy,
you're
on
asking
the
me.
air.
Well, you know, it's sad as I was part of the Citizens Government Academy, I should be able to remember this. But 1,000 gallons of clean water to deliver it to me. $50.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry to put you on the spot. I'm sure you get me back. It's $5,
Wow.
and so I contrast that with you would have to take a 5 gallon bucket and take 200 trips to your nearest creek and then
Mm.
bring it back and clean it. So to have that same thing, and then
Right.
for that water to be used in various ways, and for it to leave your house and then find its way somewhere, ultimately in the river, cleaner than we found it,
Mm.
cost about $6 for 1,000 gallons. So you know, there's just so many things that this government does, irrespective of, again, the policy, the politics, what's going on nationally. You know, we are 1,700 fathers, mothers, sisters, husbands, wives, you know, members of this community that are serving other members of this community. And that really is one of the most, I think, things that I'm honored by the most is helping to direct that through the mayor and commission and their priorities. And that's my biggest role here. And
Mhm.
then, of course, advising the mayor and commission, uh, you know, making recommendations to them. And again, at the end of the day, helping a staff to understand that while we may come up with some ideas that we think are grand, at the end of the day, the mayor and commission decide. And we set aside our personal wishes and desires and we follow them because they are the elected representatives of the people.
So I want to I see for the folks that we have watching here, if you're watching through a watch party, I know that that's a great way to share these videos. We appreciate having you here. If you're watching this on the main Historic Athens page, if you comment below the video, we can include your question live. Blaine, one last question before we turn to COVID here, which is, So you mentioned that you worked for a hurricane of a boss. You mentioned that you were in post Katrina, New Orleans, post hurricane. You mentioned that you lived on a boat with your family for a year, which is a different type of sheltering in place. You're used to high pressure situations. One thing that I know is commented on that I've heard in your approach to the job is you have a very reserved temperament, or at least a very strong poker face. Do you think that's the responsibility of a city manager to bring a coolness to the job? How do you maintain that given all of the various pressures and controversies and stresses that come with the job? Can you kind of get into that?
Sure, Tommy. Thank you. And it's interesting you've asked that question because I found myself reflecting on, I think, how I've changed as a person as part of this job, and people would not believe that I used to be a very animated person.
Mhm.
But I do know that with politics, there's a lot of emotion, and certainly in the last few years, a lot of emotion that's present. And if I add my emotion into the mix, that really doesn't help things. And
Mm.
again, I want to go back to my belief about my role in the system as a facilitator, and I listen and I take direction from a consensus of our mayor and commission, and then I try to operationalize that. And I think that the more that we get into the maelstrom of change, uh, I believe that I hope that it's helpful for me to be a little more calm and have an even demeanor, just and be consistent, so that people, a consistency of thought is something that in the course of change, and change needs to happen, something you can anchor on and be reliable. And I guess those are some of uh, the traits that I think are helpful in this position.
Mm. All right, so let's talk about. We've talked about who you are, and we've talked some about the work, but we're not speaking in a vacuum here. We're in a very specific environment, and that has been since roughly spring break of this year, uh, contending with COVID-19 and its various complications. Blaine, if it's okay, I'd like to kind of go back to late February, early March. I know that that seems like a lifetime ago, but can you walk us through some of the early days of this happening and how your office responded?
Absolutely, Tommy. And for all of us, it seems an eternity ago. And I'll just refer everybody back. I have kids here. I have children, um, and spring break is sort of a time that we go somewhere and do something. And I think that timing was somewhat fortunate for us here in Athens, Clarke County. We had an early spring break. But let's go back to when all of this started, and really in January we started hearing about this, and we all remember the media hype growing through
Mm,
February. And I will say, we use as human beings frames of reference to help us understand things. And certainly nobody, I would argue, listening to this was alive during the last pandemic. So it's
mm,
not within our personal experience to understand this. Now, we did have the SARS uh, smaller epidemic. We had the avian flu, and if everybody remembers, there was a scare, there was a small spread, and then it was contained. To a different degree, a different Ebola was something that I think killed its host so quickly that it didn't spread as quickly, but certainly it all caught our attention. But all three of those are our most recent memories, and that's was my understanding of maybe how this COVID would play out. And I do remember uh, that the media was getting to my oldest, my children, and having to explain to them as a parent, look, the flu actually kills more people, but we don't really talk about that. So again, trying to take all that into context, when now we know, with the benefit of hindsight, a little more about what we're dealing with.
mm,
Uh, February, it became evident that as the manager of an organization of human beings, that we needed to prepare and be ready, as well as an organization that has to function every day for the people of this community to live their lives. And so we have something called COOP plans, which are basically continuity of operations. So we call them COOP plans, but we had begun getting people to look at department directors to look at those and revisit those. Now, I think everybody knows their experience here in Athens, Clarke County. When we have a natural disaster, it is 100% of the time weather related. So it's an ice storm, it's a tornado, it's a severe thunderstorm. And so those things, they're coming. We briefly prepare. There's some type of happening. It can be violent, trees down, power out, that type of thing, but no longer than a week, and we're back up. And so all of our COOP plans were really focused on weather-related events. So we had to, and again, I think we all can agree, we've learned so much through this, and we're still learning about the nature of what we're facing. So by the 1st of March, we had been working on the COOP plans, and then spring break happened. If everybody will remember, I think the Saturday that spring break started was March the 7th. And so many of our employees, not all, went somewhere else. And I remember very vividly because it was the Wednesday night, which would have been the 11th. And I think that was the night maybe President Trump declared the national emergency. But I remember I was on spring break with my family and on the phone with the Georgia City County Managers Association Board, which I was president, and we were supposed to have our conference the following week in Augusta. And we were talking that night about, well, it's all the media hype, and how real is this, and do we need to go ahead and have our conference? And the thinking that night was, we need to lead by example, soldier on, let's do this.
Right.
Then you wake up Thursday morning, and it had all changed. The information came out. It wasn't just the president's press briefing or declaration.
Mm-hmm.
And that Thursday morning, it was like, this is for real. This is happening now. That Monday, that Sunday night, made the call to shut down workstations. And that's something that a manager does as the person that operates or helps to see the day-to-day operations in concert with the chief judge of the Superior Court. Does not work for us, oversees the operations of the courthouse. And so what that means, Tommy, is that it's usually done during a weather event. Anybody that is not an emergency employee should stay home because typically it's dangerous to come to work. And that usually lasts a day or so. This danger was new and different to us. So that Monday had everybody stay home. As you know, the Mayor and Commission had a special called meeting that night, and that was Monday the 16th of March. So you can see within about a 4-day window, we went from the world as we knew it to this special called emergency session to try and declare a shelter in place. And throughout the weekend of that particular weekend, as a manager, the mayor and commission can give me the authority to do some emergency powers, and that's for quick decision making. We spent a little bit of time earlier in this broadcast talking about, it takes time to get to that middle ground, and certainly in emergencies, you could argue that sometimes quick action is necessary, and that's one power that the mayor and commission can afford me. But it was clear to me, listening to all the voices that were speaking from the elected officials that weekend, that there was a real desire to very closely script how this looked. And so I told the mayor, I know I can do this, but I think maybe you might want to have this as a legislative function and as a body do this, and they did. Now, if everybody remember, that Monday night, the commission did not come to agreement on the shelter in place, but they did several days later. And I think that is an excellent example of what we just talked about. It was a issue of a lot of gravity. There was a ton of urgency behind it. People's health was at stake. On the other hand, the shutting down of businesses was something that we don't do very often. I mean, if you think about it, shutting down businesses, shutting down schools for extended periods of time is just something that doesn't happen. And so, not surprisingly, it took a few days of our elected officials talking to each other, convincing one another, sharing different perspectives. And then on Friday that week, there was a unanimous approval of it. And so, and I just want to say, I think it took a lot of courage for the elected officials at that time, because obviously, and I think this is true of many decisions made of late. You have to be in the moment to and not know what you know now, and make a decision, which is very tough. And it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, as the saying goes, but to be in the moment and only have limited information, and to make a pretty important decision, it's tough work.
Yeah. So what's fascinating about that is that you have the mayor and commission. These are citizens with a variety of different experiences, credentials, backgrounds that are coming to this. Also, all reporting to different audiences. I mean, each commissioner, every elected official has their own group of people that have their phone number on speed dial to call them. And so you take the pressure of the moment, you take all of those various backgrounds, you take all of that input. It does produce a decision at a governmental level. And we can extrapolate, we can just talk about COVID here, or we can talk about all the things that happen to you throughout the year. But then at some point, it is your office's job to execute this vision that's handed to you. How does that process work? I mean, when you're handed instruction by the mayor and commission, given what you just said about your feelings on the way this arrangement works, do you feel like, okay, I've been handed the ball, I've got to run with it? Do you feel like it's my job to figure out what how looks like? I mean, how do you approach that?
That's a great question. And obviously, the more definition that we have in consensus gives staff clearer direction. Sometimes the elected officials are suggesting certain details or wanting us to develop details. A couple of cases in point. A few years ago, they directed the manager to return to them with a recommendation on a human relations commission. And so, there was a very clear direction there. Most recently, they gave me clear direction to come back with some suggestions about how we fund community relief. And so that was a resiliency package, which we're still working through.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are times Mayor Gertz directed the county attorney to look into ways to relocate the Confederate monument. So there are sometimes very specific direction given by the mayor and commission. Oftentimes, and for anybody that this is totally boring to, I'm sorry, but we do agenda items for all of the things that the mayor and commissioner are asked to approve, and really the what we tell our department directors is, you need to write it as if the person that's reading it has no idea what you're talking about.
Right.
And there's a history to it, and then there's facts and issues, and a clear ask of the commissioners what it is they're being asked to do. And then they have the opportunity to reject that and do something totally different. And so everything that we do, Tommy, we try to we do it to gain clarity and consensus, so that we understand what it is we're supposed to be doing on their behalf.
Hmm. At the end of the day, so I mean, public administration preaches this idea of the what's it called, the public political dichotomy, or this idea that a good public administrator executes objectively. But I can't help but feel, I mean, Blaine, at the end of the day, you're a person, you have your own values, you have staff reporting to you that has their own values. Part of any manager's job, if they're managing strong leaders or attracting strong leaders, is giving them room to manage. So how do values come into play in execution in your office?
Well, so the values that I hold don't necessarily have to have any particular agenda of mine ensconced. Again, objectivity in and of itself is a value.
Hmm.
Neutrality in and of itself is a value. And I will tell you that, like most things, the more that you practice it, the easier it becomes.
Mhm.
Now, I will tell you that if for if any of the commissioners felt like, for one instance, that I was trying to limit or augment information I was giving them to get to a certain decision or outcome, then that would be a trust issue, and you really you can't be in this job without having some modicum of trust with the elected officials. So, I have seen that happen. I have seen managers take advantage of their position to try to advance something they want to see. Elected officials are intelligent human beings, and that is not something that they can abide by for very long.
Mm.
So the values that I try to bring, we talked about before, the content, the direction this government goes. Again, I would tell you that it's important that even in the midst of our current budget discussion, there's a lot of new things that the commissioners want to do, and of course we will remind them we've got to either make sure that our existing services continue in the way that they are today, or they change, or we stop doing something. If
Mm.
limited resources are dictating that. So there are, obviously there are things that we remind the commission of. Um, and here's an example for you that may be a bit extreme, but I think helps to explain the relationship that we have between the manager's office, and the elected officials. If they wanted to burn down City Hall, and they told me so, hopefully, and it does exist today, there is a relationship such that I can come to them and say, I think this is a terrible idea, and here's why: A, B, C, D, and E. And if they say, as they vote, and they say, thank you for that, we appreciate your input, but we want to burn it down. And as long as it's not illegal, once they vote and a consensus of them say that, then we're going to burn it down. You know, and so that's where the real power is, I think, in this community is after deliberation of people of different backgrounds and opinions coming together and finding some compromise, and then voting on that. That's when things happen here.
Thanks for sharing that. One of our viewers, Alex Sams, just shared a good summary on this, which is the elected officials often come up with the what, and the manager, staff, legal often seem to have to puzzle how. Not always easy. Blaine, I can't imagine it's always easy. I also will admit, though, I mean, your job effectively, you are a professional problem solver. That is your job day in and day out. How do you maintain uh, an appetite for that, and how do you maintain a sense of uh, momentum when your job is to continue? I mean, I think about the variety of things that show up on the agenda just month to month that's handed to staff. How do you maintain any sense of momentum or continuity as you're approaching all those new problems?
Well, first off, I want to thank the listener, the person watching who gave that, because that is something that I even said this morning, talking to an elected official. And you were so right. There's the what and the how, and when you live in a community with so many intelligent people, they quickly want to get to the how.
Mm.
And we spend a lot of time, and I would challenge anybody to take that filter, remember it, and then watch some of the conversations that we have, is that we will deliberate over the how when really the question is, what are we trying to accomplish? And I think that is a key role that the mayor and
Right.
commission, if they can help set the what, and they are human beings, they're going to want to get into the how, but getting to the what first is so important. And I would tell you also, Tommy, in response to your question, how do we keep the momentum? What I am incredibly humbled by is the capacity and the talent that is the employees of this that exist in the employees of this organization. Their capacity for solutions is something that I marvel at. This is not it appears to be a very top-down organization, but we have a lot of innovation that thrives here. And we started a program several years ago called Innovation Ambassadors, where we took people deep in the organization and gave them access to more information. These are people that you can tell they walk around, they've got that light in their eye, they're willing to do everything that you ask them and more. And so we gave them a little bit on the more side,
Mm.
and gave them carte blanche into critiquing the organization and coming up with ideas along with our department directors on what can we do and change. So how do we keep the momentum? It is a bit daunting, but then you recognize the sheer talent of what we have, and their momentum, I think, really carries the government forward day to day.
Great. For those of you watching, so I have one comment here that's a bit cheeky that I'm going to share. I have one last kind of general question. We're going to thank our annual sponsors, and then we'll spend the last 10 minutes we have together, Blaine, just going over the same 3 questions we've been asking each of our guests as part of this series. So Chris Dowd, no stranger, I'm sure, frequent participant in the public participation process. Said, I'm tuning in. Did the manager say he was going to burn down City Hall? JK. Thanks, Chris. Blaine, one thing I'm just really interested in, each of the leaders that I've spoken to that manage large operations, even small operations, when this became clear it was going to impact the way our work occurred, there were, I mean, I can speak personally to this, but I know we've heard it from a lot of our other guests. Yeah, there is a moment of calibration where you're really having to take a deep breath and carry that weight as a leader, that others are going to look to you during this crisis while you're still having to take care of your own mental and physical health. You know, as a leader over the last several weeks and months, how have you managed to balance your work-life balance, and how have you managed to deal with that kind of pressure?
Well, frankly, it's been tough. This has been, there's so much change right now, and change is normally something that I welcome. And if you work in this business, you need to, because you're working with uh, hopefully over time, different elected officials, and that's a different calculus of human beings at each and every election waypoint, perhaps. Um, but there's been a lot of it. The COVID, nothing within our lifetimes. And certainly, I know our employees, like any other citizen, has struggled with their own well-being and what will happen with my job, and how will we continue forward, and is this safe? We've got everything that's happened revolving around the police departments across the nation. We've got the economic downturn. There's just a lot going on right now. And I would tell you too, first off, I would not have imagined a pandemic like this.
Mm.
Secondly, I would not have imagined how incredibly busy it would be during a
Mm.
pandemic. I think some people's experience necessarily has had to, perhaps work from home, and that's frantic as people try to balance. But just the sheer amount of calls and emails and decisions that are having to be made without a very robust frame of reference, it's not let up. And I think that's true really for anybody watching this, not just me or the
Mm.
elected officials. But you can feel it. I think people are absolutely worn out,
Right.
and we're hopeful for additional clarity on what we're dealing with COVID, and we're hopeful that. But let me say all that to
Yeah.
say that what an incredibly fascinating time to be alive and to be here right now.
Mm.
And that change is uncomfortable, as I said before. And so, what changes are going to be made permanent in the wake of all this flux that we're in right now? And I think that this is the time for some permanent change. And so, thinking through that and getting out of, because as a organization, I think we excel, at least pre-COVID, at looking ahead to things that were important but not urgent, and that's known as
Mm.
quadrant 2 in some management thinking. And we have been so much engaged into the immediate and urgent,
Yeah.
and we've gotten away from our long-term thinking, and we're just now getting back to that, which is where we excel.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I wish we had more time to explore that, because you're right. It does seem that, and I'm not sure if you'd agree with this general perception, but it seems like in the wake of so much more self-awareness, awareness of our proximity to other people physically, ethically, financially, that there has been this top to bottom reassessment of our priorities and where we're going. So would you agree that whether we're talking about policing or Confederate memorials or any of these other things, that COVID has not only impacted our way of life and behavior, but has also served as a catalyst somewhat in understanding how we govern ourselves?
I think that's a fair assessment. It's been a catalyst in so many ways,
Hmm.
in ways that we don't know and understand, and particularly with our children, how this affects them. And I have conversations with my sons, and am constantly um, unsettled at times or glad at times, depending on what we're talking about the effects of this on them. So I would totally agree with that, Tommy.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to very quickly thank our sponsors, and then we will go into these last few questions we have together, Blaine. So I just want to take a moment to again thank the Athens Downtown Development Authority for supporting this week of broadcasts. We really appreciate their time. Also, the names and logos you see on the screen here, these are our annual sponsors that support our 52-year-old mission as a 501c3 nonprofit to celebrate and conserve community heritage here in Athens, Georgia. That can mean historic preservation of places and spaces and buildings, but it also can mean preserving stories like the ones you're hearing today. We want to encourage you at 2 o'clock to tune in to the staff of the Athens Welcome Center at their Facebook page for the historic livecast series they've been doing, a mixture of virtual workshops and historic site visits, welcoming you to historic places around Athens. Today's episode is one of 55. You can see some of the other guests we've had and the guests we're looking forward to. Tomorrow should be a fascinating episode. We're going to be speaking to Dr. Kim Klinowski of the University of Georgia. In addition to being a trustee with Historic Athens, she's also an epidemiologist. And so we're looking forward to really getting some clarity, hopefully there, or at least understanding what they're seeing. And then as a final note, if you'd like a quick and easy way to support Historic Athens, you can either become a member for as little as $5 a month at historicathens.com, or you can pick up one of these new historic t-shirts that are locally designed and locally printed at Satisfactory Printing. So we really appreciate that. All right, so Blaine, thanks for letting me squeeze all that in. With the 5 minutes we have here together, I want to get into our last three questions. And I do see Ginger, thanks for tuning in. Great job, thank you. Thank you, Ginger, for tuning in. Blaine, the first of my last three here is somewhat of a fun one, but it assumes that, if tomorrow all of this were over, we no longer had to shelter in place and all of our favorite places were reopened, no curbside necessary. If you had the day off in that scenario, Blaine, how would you spend the day? Where would you go?
Well, what I'd like to say is that I also want to recognize some of the good things that have come from this pandemic. And one is I've not been home a great deal, but when I am home, all the other distractions that are normally present in raising children are not present now.
Yeah.
There's no school, sports, or anything like that. And so I have really connected with my children and my wife during this time. And so if I had the day off, I would be with them. And I will tell you, Tommy, I'm glad you asked that question. I did something that I really enjoyed doing just on Saturday, and we rode our bikes around Athens, and we started. We got on the Greenway system and hooked up to the Firefly Trail, came through downtown, and when you think about our human history here in Athens, Clarke County, I admire the job that you do and your organization.
Thank you.
There's a lot that we do that in this series of bringing all that to light, and I just fell back in love with Athens yet again, just being out in and around it. And so I would do that all over again every week if I had that day off.
Well said. I actually have plans after work today to go on the Greenway with my wife and my daughter. So very much, I feel the same way. Second to last question here. The part of our job, in addition to education and advocacy, is historic preservation. We know that after recessions or large events like the ones we're facing, you can have pent-up development pressures that can sometimes spill over into historic areas. And so we've just been asking each of our guests to consider, Blaine, if somebody's watching your interview 50 years from now at the University of Georgia Library and they go out for the day with their family, What are some historic places in town that you love that you hope that we continue to keep up and preserve?
Well, I'll tell you that there's human history and there's geologic history, and,
Mm,
and 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 I think with the pandemic, being outside is something that we've all come to value.
yeah.
But if we talk about human history, I guess um, that is even changing, Tommy, as we speak.
Right.
There are things that have been historical uh, places and things in our past that don't necessarily represent a great part of our past.
Mm,
And so when we talk about, I guess a connection that I have is City Hall.
yeah.
And no, Chris, I don't want to burn it down. Um, I'm hoping the Mayor and Commission
Yeah,
don't vote that way.
for the record, we would be against that. I just want to be clear.
I'm
Yeah,
not sure that in and
yeah,
of itself would
yeah,
be interesting to a family, but
yeah.
I think to answer your question, Tommy, much like the bike ride,
Mm,
there are some really great character areas
mhm.
that are evident, and there are character areas that your organization and others are helping to dust off and bring back to the forefront.
Mhm.
And so I think the diversity and variety of Athens would be the most interesting to me as an outsider.
Yeah.
Go into the different character areas.
Thank you. Yeah, and I will say that those of you that have not gone on some of the newer sections of the Greenway that connect to the Firefly Trail, you can see some of these character areas that even for those of you that grew up in Athens, you may not have seen before. So that's a great example, Blaine. Thank you. All right. So as our last question, as we close out with you today, uh, let's fast forward even another 50 years past that. Recently, the Red and Black did a 100-year retrospective on the 1918 flu, and a lot of us looked back to that as we were kind of facing this moment. Similarly, Blaine, if someone 100 years from now is looking back at this interview, what would you want them to know about how Athens, Georgia faced this moment?
I'm really proud of our citizens and our elected officials. Again, I think there was some courage in making that early decision. Um, being over the police department and over code enforcement that was in charge of helping to make sure what the mayor and commission wanted to see happen. By and large, our citizens really embraced the change and put their health and the health of their neighbors first. And so I've been proud. We've watched all over the nation and certainly the state that other folks assume that it's business as usual,
Mm.
and our group, much to their economic detriment, our businesses, our restaurants, our bars, um, they have done what we consider to be the right thing, and with what little we knew at the time, and even now, they continue to be respectful of that, and that's probably what I'm most proud of, to be a part of a community that took this seriously.
Thank you, Blaine. Thank you for your time. I want to say my last editorial remark today is just we've gone through this whole series. Today's episode 47, and I feel like no one had mentioned City Hall before today. And so I just want to say, as a citizen, and Blaine, you get to go in there and work so frequently. But if you're a citizen, if you're someone who's watching this and you have not been to City Hall, whether it's for public comment or other reasons, when it's safe to get out and get in, please do. It's even if it's just to glance at the wall of all of the mayors that have led the city, or to really get a sense of that building. It really is a phenomenal building. I'm sure there are worse places to go in and work, right, Blaine?
It is a beautiful building,
Mm,
and we keep it busy for those very reasons. And
yeah,
and as you know, it's a human context as well.
right.
I mean, over 100 years of decisions have been made in this building that affects every resident. Some of them maybe not so good.
Mm,
So it continues on today, and that's a kind of a living testament to Athens.
thank you. Blaine, thank you so much for the work you're doing and for taking the time to talk to us today. To everyone who tuned in, we will be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock. And also, you can head over to the Facebook page for the Welcome Center right now if you want some more lunchtime content. Blaine, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. We appreciate
Thank,
it.
thank you, Tommy. Y'all have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.